Psalm 25 still. Last time we touched it, but we didn't go into it very much. We're in verse 20. What we have is verse 20. David says, "Guard my life and rescue me." Now remember, he had actual enemies. In verse 19, he says, "See how numerous are my enemies and how fiercely they hate me." Okay, this was not like, well, I have rivals. No, it's click it up, okay? It's way to the next levels. These were actual enemies who they wanted blood. And so then he says in verse 20, "Guard my life and rescue me." God is a rescuer. He doesn't always rescue me, but he is a rescuer nonetheless. One of the stories Jesus told that I love deeply is the parable of the lost sheep. There was a shepherd who had 100 sheep in his care, and he counted them, and there were only 99. So he left the 99 and went, searched, and found the one. And he carried it back to the rest of the flock. There's lots of creative thinking and even creative doctrine in that. But boy, just the picture. Jesus is that shepherd. He said, "I am the good shepherd." And you know, you've probably seen it if you do Facebook, the meme that says, it seems ridiculous that the shepherd would leave the 99 to find the one until you're the one. Jesus doesn't resent rescuing us. The shepherd in that parable, Jesus doesn't talk anything about resentment. He just talks about he found him and he brought him back and there was rejoicing. God does not resent having to rescue us. You may, but you may not have an actual enemy who wants your blood, who wants to harm you physically. But we do have another big enemy. Remember, I talked about this last time. Peter says, your enemy, the devil, is like a roaring lion seeking whom he may devour. And right before that, he says, be sober-minded, be alert. You have an enemy. Well, no doubt the devil was David's enemy as well. And I think you can make a reasonable case that the devil was using these enemies to execute on his primary purpose, to steal, kill, and destroy. David said, "Guard my life and rescue me." Now, let's think about David. In my study, this psalm was written by him before he had been installed as the king of Israel. And one of his primary enemies was Saul and Saul's entire army. It's like Saul just wouldn't give it up. And he pursued and pursued and chased and chased. And his idea was, well, he tried several times to kill David. And he sent his troops to do what he hadn't been able to do. So this is not some made-up, imaginary, emotional enemy for David. This is a real enemy. Now, there's this part of it that God did rescue David. How? Well, the narrative in 1st or 2nd Samuel is that Saul goes out to battle. So, and his son, Jonathan, the person David was deeply connected to, committed to, loved as a brother. They went into battle, and Jonathan was killed, and Saul was mortally wounded. He knew that he wasn't dead yet, but he was going to die, and if he didn't die soon, the Philistines would torture and torment, and his death would be agonizing and drawn out and horrible. And so he told his armor bearer, kill me, just get it over with. Well, the armor bearer couldn't. So Saul falls on his own sword, kills himself. It's a pretty dramatic rescue. There was another time when David needed God's rescue. Well, there's not just one, I'm sure, but the one I'm thinking of is when his son Absalom came in and attempted a coup. David fled for his life out of Jerusalem. Absalom comes in and he basically desecrates David's house, his home. He sets himself up, establishes himself as Israel's king. And then he is going to go after David, his dad, not to try and patch things up, but to kill him. David flees along with his army, and when Absalom and his army come after David, David's army has to respond, but David's word was, don't harm my son Absalom. Except, probably more of the story than you need, but Absalom's hair was so long and so thick, he was riding on a mule, and he rode under a tree, and his hair got caught in the tree. It jerked him off his mount, and he was suspended there, couldn't get up and he couldn't get down. And one of David's men spotted him. And another of David's trusted commanders killed him. David was rescued in that, but David mourned and wept. He screamed. He cried in agony over the son of his Absalom. Over his son Absalom's death. God is a rescuer. He was for David. What do I need God to rescue me from? Most often there's two, I don't have any big enemies that I know of other than the devil. But the two things I most often find myself hoping and praying that God will rescue me from are choices. And as I get older, I think I'm making fewer really rebellious and sinful choices, but I still make choices that didn't work out. And so I cry out to him to rescue me from the consequences of those choices. And then there are other people's choices that I call out to God to rescue me from the consequence of their choices. Okay. And then David goes on. He starts again, verse 20. Guard my life and rescue me. Do not let me put to shame, for I take refuge in you. It's almost like David is saying, come on, God. Don't let me be put to shame. People know I'm trusting you, and if you got to come through here. If you fail me, that'd be shameful. Don't let me be put to shame, for I take refuge in you. And So there is this aspect of, now God, don't let me down. But there's also the aspect of, I take refuge in you because only you can do this for me. A lot of times in our world, we take refuge in tons and tons of stuff. Many of us take refuge in our savings and income, our possessions, our accumulated stuff. That represents our security. Is that wrong to acquire stuff and lay back savings? I don't think so. But if that's my only point of refuge, I'm in trouble. Others, they take refuge in other people. Like, somebody else has got to take care of me. Somebody else needs to be responsible for me. This happens in codependent relationships, and it's not healthy. It doesn't work out. It can't be sustained well over time. You know people who this has been the case, and then when their negative enabler is no longer available, they're toast because they've never learned how to take responsibility for themselves because they've never had to. Okay. I got to ask myself, who and what are my refuges? Debbie, my wife, is. I have a small circle of very dear, treasured friends, and a bigger circle of friends that don't quite get into that smaller circle. And this is not bad. This is good. I want and need the support of my wife and my friends and my kids and my grands, and that's how God intends that. The deal is, though, they have to be a secondary refuge. That God has to be my primary refuge. Anytime I am so predisposed to not taking refuge in God until there are no other options. And I don't want to be that way. I want God to be my primary refuge. I want family and friends to be additional, but they can't be my primary. God has to be my primary refuge. All right, how do you do that? I don't do it well, but I can tell you the things that have seemed to work for me is, at the beginning of the day, I have to set myself up with the full-on realization and confession that God is my refuge. There's a phrase in Psalm 18 that I include in my journal every morning. I love you, Lord. You are my strength. David calls on God as his refuge. I have got to set myself up at the beginning of the day because it sets the tone for the rest of the day. And then throughout the day, I pray stupid prayers all the time to God, and I have this running conversation with him, and I have to remind myself and call out to him as my primary refuge. Because if I don't, well, I'll substitute other people and things, or, which that's bad, that doesn't work, or even worse, I'll decide I don't need no stinking refuge. And that never works well. Okay. Pick it up next time on Soul Care with Stevie.